If you have red hair, take a second and really look at it, because you are carrying something that almost no one else alive shares. Out of every 100 people on this planet, maybe 1 or 2 have hair the color of yours. Somewhere between 70 and 140 million people in a world of 8 billion. That is all of you. In some countries, you could travel for days and never pass another. In the most literal, biological sense of the word, you are rare. And you have almost certainly been told where it came from. The Celts, the Vikings, Ireland, Scotland, some green and misty corner in the far northwest of Europe. A tidy story with a tidy little map. Almost everything in that story is either incomplete or simply wrong. The real trail behind the color of your hair is older than the Celts, older than any nation that has ever tried to claim it as its own, and it runs to places you would never think to look for it. There is even a version of this story where your hair reaches back to another kind of human entirely, a people who disappeared from the earth 40,000 years ago. You have probably heard that one too, that redheads are somehow part Neanderthal. By the time we are finished, you will understand why that idea is both true and completely backwards, and why the honest answer is stranger and more beautiful than the myth ever was. This channel follows the history written inside the human body, the letters of DNA that outlast every empire that has ever tried to own them. If that is the kind of thing you want more of, you know what to do. Then let's follow the trail. Here is the first thing that is going to rearrange how you see your own reflection. Your hair is not red because your body added something to it. Your hair is red because your body stopped hiding something. Deep inside the cells that give color to your hair and skin, there is a switch. It has a name, MC1R, and it sits on chromosome 16, riding on the surface of the little factories that manufacture your pigment. And that switch has 2 settings. Turn it one way and those cells pour out eumelanin, the dark pigment, the browns and the blacks, the color that most of the world's hair carries. Turn it the other way and the cells make something else instead, pheomelanin, a warm, reddish, golden pigment. And here is the part that surprises people. That reddish pigment is not exotic. It is in almost everyone. In most people, the dark pigment is simply produced in such quantity that it drowns the red out completely. In you, that switch is turned down. The red was never added to you, it was uncovered. Researchers have found the specific changes responsible, a small handful of variants in that one gene with unglamorous names like R151C, R160W, and D294H. Each one gently weakens the receptor so it stops calling as loudly for the dark pigment, and the warm pigment underneath finally gets its turn. And because these are recessive variants, you generally need 2 copies to see the full effect, one inherited from each parent, which means red hair can travel silently, hidden, through a family for generations. 2 dark-haired parents, neither with a trace of red, can carry it quietly between them, and then, in a single child, the switch on both copies is turned down at once, and the color that was invisible for a century suddenly appears. That is the first strange truth about your hair. It is not a thing that was given to you. It is a thing that was waiting. And before we follow that trail across the world, there is one more thing you should know about this switch, because it turns out it does far more than color your hair. The same weakened receptor that lets the red pigment through also lightens your skin, scatters those freckles across it, and leaves it far more exposed to the sun. It is why redheads burn where others tan. All of it comes from that one change. Turn down the pigment, and the shield the pigment gave you comes down with it. But the strangest part reaches somewhere you would never think to look. That receptor, MC1R, is not only found in the skin, it is also active in the brain. And so, over the years, doctors began to notice something odd in operating rooms. In a study published in the journal Anesthesiology in 2004, a team led by Edwin Leem found that red-haired patients needed noticeably more anesthetic, on the order of 19% more to stay safely under during surgery than people with dark hair. Now, and this part matters, the science here is genuinely tangled, and I want to be honest with you about that. Later work found the picture is mixed. Redheads seem to be less sensitive to some kinds of pain, like a pinprick or an electric shock, and more sensitive to others, like heat and cold. Some studies found no clear difference at all. Much of the research was done in small groups, mostly women, and some evidence suggests the pain effects and the hair color may not even trace to exactly the same genetic changes. So this is a real, measured tendency, not a destiny, and not a rule that fits every redhead. But it hints at something quietly profound. The same small switch that decides the color of your hair may also, faintly, shape the way your body meets the world. So where was it waiting? Where did this switch first get turned down? To answer that, we have to leave the tidy map behind. Because red hair does not have a single ancestor. There is no one person we can point to and say, it began with them. What red hair has instead is something researchers call a founder signature, a pattern, a concentration of these variants that builds and builds in certain places and thins to almost nothing in others. Here is what that phrase actually means. Imagine a small group of people somewhere far back who happened to carry these variants and who then settled a region, grew and multiplied over the centuries, marrying mostly among themselves. Every generation of their descendants inherits that same starting hand. The variants that were merely present in a handful of founders become common in the millions who come after. It is not that red hair was invented in that place. It is that a small founding population carried it in, and a mostly closed community held onto it and passed it down, until the whole region wore its signature. And the place where it builds highest is exactly where the legend says. In Scotland, around 13 in every 100 people carry red hair openly. In Ireland, roughly 1 in 10, and as many as 40 to 50 in every 100 carry a hidden copy of the gene without ever showing it themselves. Walk through those countries and the flame is everywhere, visible and invisible at once, burning in one person and sleeping in the one beside them. Think about what that number really means. For every redhead you can actually see in a place like Ireland, there are several more people around them carrying the gene in secret, one copy quietly, showing nothing at all. The visible redheads are only the surface of it. Underneath is a vast hidden reservoir, people in whom the flame is present but unlit, waiting for a second copy to arrive from the right partner in the right generation. The trait you can count is only a fraction of the trait that is truly there. But here is where the neat story starts to come apart. Because the reason the flame burns so brightly there is not some special Celtic essence. It is something far more human and far more accidental. Picture the far northwest edge of Europe, thousands of years ago. Small communities, the sea on one side, cold and gray, long winters, weak, low sunlight for much of the year. Populations that stayed relatively isolated, marrying largely within themselves, generation after generation. And in conditions like that, two quiet forces go to work. The first is simple chance, what geneticists call drift. In a small, closed population, a variant that happens to be there can rise in frequency for no dramatic reason at all, simply because the group was small enough for luck to matter. The second force is more interesting. In a place with very little sun, pale skin is not a flaw, it is an advantage. Lighter skin lets the body make more vitamin D from the thin light that does reach it. And the same weakened switch that turns hair red also, as it happens, lightens the skin. So in the low sunlight north, the variant that gives you red hair may have been quietly, gently favored. Carried forward not because it was better in some grand sense, but because it fit that particular gray corner of the world. Sit with that for a second. The flame did not concentrate in the north because the people there were chosen. It concentrated because a cold, dim, isolated place is exactly the kind of accidental laboratory where a rare thing can gather and hold. And if that were the whole story, we could stop here. But it isn't. because the same flame shows up in places the Celtic map cannot explain at all. Travel almost 2,000 miles east of Ireland, deep into Russia, to the forests and rivers of the Volga region. There you will find the Udmurt people, a Finno-Ugric people with no Celtic history whatsoever, speaking a language unrelated to anything in the British Isles. And among the Udmurt, red hair reaches levels that rival Scotland itself, something close to 1 in 10. No Viking longships reach them. No Celtic migration explains them. The flame is simply there. Because the variants that dim the pigment switch were scattered across ancient Eurasia long before anyone drew a border or named a tribe. And here and there, in an isolated pocket, in a founding population, they gathered and rose, entirely on their own. And the flame appears in stranger places still. In the mountains and deserts of North Africa, among some Berber communities, red hair surfaces, rare but unmistakably real. It flickers through parts of Central Asia. It appears in the ancient record far outside the north. The Greeks and the Romans wrote about red-haired peoples across a wide sweep of the ancient world, not one neat homeland. And when geneticists reach back into ancient remains from across Europe and Western Asia, they find these pigment variants already scattered widely thousands of years ago, not sitting in a single birthplace waiting to spread outward, but present in many places at once, long before the tribes and nations we remember ever had names. The map, in other words, is not a single point with arrows pointing outward. It is a scatter, a constellation of separate places where the same quiet change in the same small gene rose to the surface, again and again, wherever the conditions were right. That is the real shape of it. Your hair is not the fingerprint of one people. It is a recurring event. And perhaps that is exactly why red hair has always drawn such strange attention. Because it stands out, because it is rare and visible, and unlike the people around it, it has spent thousands of years being marked as different. The ancient writers singled it out. Old superstitions gathered around it. For long stretches of history, to be a redhead was to be seen as somehow other, set faintly apart even from your own neighbors. But everything we have just traced turns that idea completely on its head. The very thing that made red hair look like a mark of separateness is the thing that reveals how deeply it is shared. It is not the badge of one tribe standing apart from the rest. It is a thread that reaches across nearly every border we have ever drawn. Which brings us, at last, to the oldest and most famous claim of all. The one you have heard whispered your whole life, that red hair comes from the Neanderthals. To understand why people say this, we have to go back to the year 2007 and to two very old sets of bones. The first came from a cave in northern Spain called El Cidrón, the remains of a Neanderthal who lived and died there around 43,000 years ago. The second came from a site called Monte Lessini in northern Italy, a Neanderthal older still, closer to 50,000 years. Two individuals from two ends of a vanished world. A team led by the geneticist Carles Lalueza-Fox, working with Holger Römpler and Michael Hofreiter, scientists at the University of Barcelona, the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, and Harvard, did something that, at the time, was close to impossible. They reached into those ancient bones and pulled out a fragment of that very same pigment gene, MC1R, the switch. It is worth pausing on how hard that is. Ancient DNA does not survive well. Over tens of thousands of years, it breaks into tiny fragments and soaks up contamination from everyone who has ever handled the bones. The constant fear in this kind of work is that you are not reading the Neanderthal at all, that you are reading a modern human who touched the sample, or noise from the damage itself. So the team ran their checks carefully, working to rule out contamination, chemical damage, and laboratory error before they would trust what they were seeing. The El Cidrón bones, in particular, came from a site that preserved what appears to have been a Neanderthal family group, a rare and intimate window onto a single band of people who lived and died together in that cave. And they found something extraordinary. Both of those Neanderthals carried a variant that weakened the switch, a change that, when the team recreated it in living human cells, reduced the receptor's activity to a level that, in a person, would lighten the hair and skin. In other words, at least some Neanderthals, tens of thousands of years ago, very likely had red or reddish hair and pale skin. The researchers estimated that perhaps around 1 in 100 Neanderthals across Europe may have been redheads, roughly the same fraction as in the world today. For a moment, it looks like the myth is confirmed. Red-haired Neanderthals, red-haired humans. The line runs straight through, doesn't it? And this is where the real twist lives, because the researchers looked closely at exactly which change the Neanderthals carried. Its name is R307G, and they compared it against the DNA of thousands of living people, around 3,700 modern humans in the original work. R307G was not among them, not in one single person. The variant that turned a Neanderthal's hair red is a variant that no living redhead carries. It is not R151C. It is not R160W. It is not D294H. It is a completely different letter in a completely different spot, and it does not exist in the modern human population at all. Let that settle. The Neanderthals were not the source of your hair. They were doing the exact same thing you are doing, turning down the very same switch, but they arrived at it entirely on their own, by a different road, on a different branch of the human family. This is what makes the story so much stranger than the myth. Two kinds of human, separated by hundreds of thousands of years of their own history, each independently reached for the same fire-colored hair, through different changes to the same small gene. Nature, in two places, at two times, struck the same spark from two different flints. The flame was lit twice, not passed down, lit twice. This has a name in biology, and it is one of the most quietly astonishing ideas in all of nature. It is called convergent evolution, when life, in two separate places with no connection between them, arrives at the very same solution on its own. Wings evolve this way more than once, in birds, in bats, in insects, each on its own branch, none of them copying the others. Eyes evolved from scratch many times over. Faced with the same problem, nature keeps discovering the same answer by completely different roads. And so it went with the fire in your hair. Two kinds of human, tens of thousands of years and an entire branch of the family apart, each found their own way to the same trick. Quiet the pigment switch and let the warm color rise through. Not one flame carried from them down to us. Two flames, kindled separately, that only happen to look the same. Now, to be honest with you, there is one more layer, and it is a fascinating one. Neanderthals are not entirely gone. Most people outside of Africa carry a small fraction of Neanderthal DNA, woven into their genome from ancient encounters. And it turns out there is a piece of Neanderthal pigment gene that did survive in living people. A different variant, carried today by some populations in East Asia, Taiwan, and the Pacific. But notice what that variant is not. It is not the red one. It is a separate change, with its own subtle effects, linked in some studies to things like freckling, not to red hair at all. So even the one genuine thread of Neanderthal pigment DNA that reaches the modern world is not the thread you were told about. The red-haired Neanderthal and the red-haired human remain two separate flames, burning on two separate branches that never actually touched. So let's bring this all the way back to you. If you are watching this with red hair of your own, what does it actually mean now? It does not mean you are Celtic. It does not mean you are Neanderthal. It does not mean you belong to some older, rarer, more special lineage than the person sitting next to you. The color of your hair is not a badge, and it is not a bloodline. Here is what it actually is. You carry a small set of instructions that quietly turn down a switch. Instructions that arose again and again in people living in low, thin light and were passed down a branching, border-crossing, ocean-crossing tree that connects you to redheads in Ireland and redheads by the Volga and redheads in the mountains of North Africa, none of whom needed to belong to your nation, your language, or your history to share the exact same quiet change. The flame does not respect the lines we care about. It never has. It burns in a Scottish village and a Russian forest and a Berber valley, in people who would call themselves nothing alike, and every one of them is, in this one small letter of DNA, a distant cousin of yours. And it is fragile. Remember, this is a recessive thing, a switch that has to be turned down on both copies at once, that can vanish into hiding for 100 years, that could so easily have flickered out for good in some cold winter long ago. It did not. It made it through every migration, every collapse, every generation where it slept unseen, all the way down to the strands you can see right now. Against genuinely long odds, it survived to reach you. That is the truth the myth was always circling around, without quite understanding it. Red hair is not the ghost of a vanished people living on inside you. It is something far more remarkable than that. It is proof that the human story is not a single line running from them to us, but a branching, repeating, endlessly inventive thing, where the same small miracle can be struck more than once, in more than one kind of human, in more than one corner of the earth. A flame that was lit in the deep past, and lit again, and carried, quietly, hidden, stubborn, all the way to you. Older than any nation, older than any flag, older than any border ever drawn across a map. The same fire, lit more than once, and still, after all of it, burning. If you carry it, now you know what you're really carrying. Not a caveman, not a bloodline, a spark that the world keeps relighting and never quite lets go. If the histories hidden inside the human body are what you came here for, subscribe and follow along. There is a great deal of this story still left to trace.